What crime exactly are you accusing President Obama of committing, and do you believe the Justice Department should prosecute him?
Obamagate. It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on from before I even got elected, and it's a disgrace that it happened. And if you look at what's gone on, and if you look at now all of this information that's being released, and from what I understand, that's only the beginning. Some terrible things happened, and it should never be allowed to happen in our country again. And you'll be seeing what's going on over the coming weeks. But I wish you'd write honestly about it, but unfortunately, you choose not to do so. Yeah, John, please.
Crime. What is the crime exactly that you're accusing him of?
You know what the crime is. The crime is very obvious to everybody.
Phil Rucker, The Washington Post, exposing Donald Trump's repeated and debunked efforts to blame former President Obama for the Russia investigation and Michael Flynn's own lies told to the FBI, lies he admitted to telling. Trump is unable to define Obamagate and those alleged crimes. But what is clear is the president's attempts to divert attention away from his administration's handling of the pandemic. Our friend Frank Figliuzzi writes it may be part of an even more troubling effort. He says Trump's, quote, truth twisting is to try and protect his ego on a, quote, scorched earth joyride against justice. It's an intensifying strategy and one that he can't pull off without Attorney General Bill Barr. Joining us now is the aforementioned Frank Figliuzzi, a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI. Our friend, former acting Solicitor General Neil Katyal is here. Frank, take us through your piece, because it's terrifying, but it is all out in the open. Donald Trump has sought to prosecute his political enemies since when Jeff Sessions was the Attorney General and Don McGahn was the White House counsel, and those efforts were thwarted then, but not so much now, maybe, with Bill Barr there.
Well, I talked about in the article that it's not very difficult to engage in what I call predictive analysis. The clues and warning signs have been there, and they're getting stronger and stronger, that tell us where this is all headed and what the next weeks and months ahead are going to look like. And clearly, if you look at what the president has been retweeting, the kind of conspiracy content he's been retweeting, and what he's been saying publicly and to the press, all signs are that we're headed toward a period of time that's going to be quite ugly, where he's going to certainly imply and want people to infer that President Obama and Vice President Biden engaged in a conspiracy against him to gin up the Russia hoax, as he calls it, to gin up the case against Flynn. And on a worst case scenario, as I point out in the article, we may see an accomplice in this mess, and that would be the Attorney General of the United States, who might even go so far as to attempt to charge or smear in some official way, perhaps even to try to call a grand jury, where we see former officials, prior administration officials, attempt to ruin them. But I want to point out, as I did in the article, that it's really important to understand the fact versus fiction. What I see in the conspiracy theories, particularly the Federalist article that the president retweeted, is the notion that just because the intelligence community was briefing the Obama White House on the Russia threat, on concerns about Flynn during the transition period, and just because President Obama said, hey, this concerns me because we're about to give classified briefings to the incoming administration, please tell me whether we can trust Flynn and the transition team to give them the classified briefings. The intel community went out and looked at that. Now everybody on the Trump side seems to be saying, there's the bombshell evidence that this was a conspiracy.
Neil, Frank Figliuzzi writes about and talks about fact versus fiction. Here's some facts that I remember. Fact, the person who warned Donald Trump not to put Mike Flynn on any of the lists for key national security positions, posts, including national security advisor, including defense secretary, including CIA director or secretary of state, wasn't a Democrat. It wasn't Obama. It was Chris Christie. Fact, Chris Christie was fired as head of the transition for not putting Mike Flynn on any of the lists as even a top 5 or 10 candidate for any important national security position. Fact, Chris Christie was punished by Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon, who was his henchman in that undertaking. They dumped the transition books, which didn't have Mike Flynn's name on any of the lists for any of the key national security posts, because he, too, shared concerns about whether Mike Flynn was suitable for a national security position. So there's a pretty inconvenient little wrinkle in Donald Trump's fantastical delusions about Mike Flynn and the Russia investigation. Chris Christie didn't think he belonged anywhere near classified information or a senior national security post either.
Yeah, it's fantastical delusions, as you put it, Nicole. It's also kind of tinfoil hattish, really, at the end of the day. I mean, I've taught criminal law for over 20 years at Georgetown. I've never heard of the crime called Obamagate. It doesn't exist. And I think if you're the sitting president of the United States and you're going to accuse your predecessor of a crime, you darn well better specify what that crime actually is and not just say, oh, it, or whatever he said yesterday. That's ridiculous. And, what this really is an attempt to distract, not just from the terrible handling of the pandemic with now 80,000 lives lost, but also the terrible handling of the Flynn case itself. I mean, what they are throwing up is a bunch of chaff that doesn't hold up. The fact is you had Michael Flynn plead guilty twice to lying to the FBI. The government admits he lied to the vice president, and now they're trying to, now they've tried to drop the charges. And they're hoping with all of this, innuendo about Obamagate and stuff, people will just get confused. And that's why I think it's so important for the judge in the Michael Flynn case to do what a former federal judge has said today in the Washington Post, Judge Gleason, which is you got to inquire into the circumstances of this dropped prosecution, because at stake is really the idea of rule of law and justice. And even if the president at his press conferences wants to throw out these words like Obamagate and stuff like that, the American public have a right to know what happened here and get to the bottom of it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.